I grew up the youngest of 4 boys. When we were kids, Mom and Dad set aside money in a bank account for each one of us and let it grow so that when we reached the age of 18, as pseudo-responsible adults, we could have what was there and use it for whatever we needed. My older 2 brothers didn't do college, so they each used it to buy a car. My other brother and I did go to college, so we used ours to help with our first year. It just occurred to me for the first time that when I was in high school, I never once wondered if that money was going to be available to me when I turned 18, or if they would actually give it to me as promised. It just never even crossed my mind. Mom and Dad never gave me a reason to doubt them. They cared about me and always followed through on what they said. The money was already in the bank, in my name, just waiting for me to reach the age when I could have it. This story came to mind as I've been reading and studying Galatians. Paul was so desperate for them to understand the nature and extent of the promises of God, that the inheritance that they have, that salvation, the relationship with Jesus, the author, creator, and sustainer of life, was not based on the works of the law, but on hearing with faith. And in Galatians 3:18, he seems to get to the core of his point. It states, "For if the inheritance is based on law, it is no longer based on a promise, but God has granted it to Abraham by means of a promise." Here he's talking about 2 opposing principles. Again, the inheritance he's talking about is salvation, that relationship with Jesus now and for eternity. And if gaining that inheritance is based on a promise, why would we think it could be maintained, sustained, or grown by works of the law? And he states clearly that God has granted it to Abraham by means of a promise. Now, I want to focus on the verb here that's translated has granted. The verb itself, as well as the tense of the verb, are both significant. The word is charizomai, and the simple meaning is to give freely with no strings attached. The root of the word is charis, which is our word for grace. So Paul here emphasizes that when God made the initial promise to Abraham, it was never conditioned on Abraham's commitment or works or response, but only on God's character, trustworthiness, and power to fulfill it, which are all evident throughout the whole of Scripture. The tense is also unique and significant. The tense here is called the perfect tense, which means the action has been completed and the results of the action are continuing on forevermore in full effect. In other words, the blessing that was promised to and through Abraham has been in the bank the whole time, with our names on the account, and when Jesus came 2,000 years later, the promise was fulfilled. The action was completed, and we could now access the inheritance that was set aside for us. And not only that, but it is an ongoing promise from now into eternity. What God has provided, He has the character, trustworthiness, and power to sustain and grow for eternity. We know that we can rely on God's promises. And in reading and studying Scripture, we see that He has made so many promises to us. He even promised to send His Spirit to live in us, to grow His fruit in our lives, and fulfill the purposes He has for each of us. God has reminded me through this that I need to remember that He is always faithful and has never failed to fulfill His word. I should examine His Scriptures daily and deeply for the promises He has made. My role is to read and study His word, to be attentive to the Spirit that speaks, and continue to respond, not in uninspired law-keeping, but in exuberant and joyful obedience in faith, and watch in awe as God continues to uphold the incredible promises He has made.